All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Real Live Talk. I'm really pumped that you're here to check out this episode, this conversation with me. If you're watching live, feel free to go ahead and jump in on the comments and ask questions and things like that. All that is super welcome. Actually, even if you're not live, if you're watching this, you can still leave questions and whatever, leave comments and stuff like that. And we're I'm happy to engage with you, whether you're live or later on or whatever the case may be. But I appreciate you for taking the time to check out this episode. I have an awesome guest with me today, Ryan Ermeling, and he'll be up on the screen with me in just a second. But Ryan is an entrepreneur. He founded Stretch Internet back in 2003. And during his 15 years as president and CEO of Stretch Internet, he grew the company into the largest video streaming provider in the collegiate athletic space, servicing more than 40% of the market. In 2017, Stretch was placed on the Inc. 5000 list as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in the United States of America. He sold the company in 2018 and later founded Seven Marches. And we'll get into this for sure with Ryan, but Seven Marches helps churches, ministries, and Christian-led for-profit organizations break down walls to achieve perpetual momentum. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Ryan up on the screen with me now. Ryan, thank you, man, for being here. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm excited to hear about what's going on in your life presently and what you're doing out there in the world where business and ministry intersects together. I think it's super cool, the approach that you take to life and to entrepreneurship and being kingdom-minded in business, and what you do to help ministries and churches and really kingdom-minded organizations. And so it's an honor to have you on the show. Thanks for being here, man.
Duke, great to be with you, man. Had a lot of fun with you last time, and looking forward to hanging with you this morning.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. You must be a morning person, right?
Well, hey, when you've got daughters and school rhythms and everything else going on, and a wife who likes to get up at 4:30 in the morning, you can't really help but be a morning person. So yeah, I'm a morning person.
Whew. Yeah, so because it's 8 a.m. for you right now, and you look fresh, and you look like you're ready to go. I know for me it's 10, and that's on the early side for me for when I start podcasts, because I always need like lots of time in the morning before I'm ready to actually engage and have like a high level conversation. I need hours before I'm ready to jump into stuff like that. So
Well, you need time for that do too, right? You got to get your get your hair looking good and everything. See, I don't have that
yeah, that's
problem.
it.
I just
The
hop out of
podcast
bed and I'm ready to go.
the podcast takes about an hour and a half, but all this prep time to get to look this good, it's about 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah, for
So
sure, for
you
sure.
can
No, I've got
imagine
my coffee
how long it takes.
yeah, no, I'm ready to roll. I enjoy the mornings. They're peaceful and calm. So I would classify myself more as a morning person than a night owl.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I've never been. It's funny because I can switch back and forth just depending on what mode of life I'm in. Right now, where I'm at currently, I'm definitely not a morning person because my schedule doesn't really require it for the most part. But in the past, I mean, I had times where, I had to be at work at 5:30 in the morning. Or my wife and I, for a while, we were running a house of prayer during our ministry, or as missionaries in Mexico. And 6 a.m. the doors opened, and so I'd be there at 5:30 to open, and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, basically up at like 4 o'clock, going to bed super early, and I adjusted to it. And so like I've been in modes of life where I have to be a morning person and I make it work. But right now I'm kind of, the way my schedule is, I don't really have to do it that way. So
Enjoy
but
that
I have
season.
flip-flopped.
Yeah, enjoy that season. I mean, for me too, it's partly just about syncing with your spouse, right? Like I said, my wife's
Yeah.
always been up early and goes to bed on the early side too. So I found out if I went to bed late and got up late, we missed some of that time to connect, right? So it's trying to sync up your schedule and your life with your spouse too. So it's worked well.
Yeah, that's really good, and that's really important. I just realized, as you said, enjoy the season. I just realized it's about to end because we're having another baby.
Oh,
So I just
wow.
realized that yeah, in April my wife is due. So
Congrats. That's awesome.
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That's very
Yeah,
cool. Is
I
that
just
number what for you?
number 3. Number 3
Number
for
three.
us.
Okay. Three's a
And you
crowd. That's what we have too. So
yeah, you have 3 as well, right? 3 girls or
three girls. Yeah. Yep. Three girls. I got my two male dogs, so they help balance things out a little bit. But blessed with three girls. Wouldn't have it any other way. So
yeah.
we had a gap between our second and third of almost 9 years, and so all my
Mm,
buddies were saying, "Oh, you just wanted to keep trying for that boy." I'm like, honestly, I knew I had the girl thing down. We had all these hand-me-down clothes ready to go. Let's go with another girl. So I've loved being a dad of girls.
that's awesome, man. Yeah, we have 2 boys and we're expecting a girl for number 3. And, I'm so happy for my wife. My wife needed it. She was so outnumbered. And,
It's
yeah,
awesome. You'll love it. It'll be a fun. Boys are blessings too, but it'll be a fun change of pace and just to see the different temperaments and personalities. Um, throughout as they get older, I think you guys will have a blast. So enjoy.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, man. Well, last time you were here, and I believe that was episode 12. So for anybody that wants to go back and get a little bit more background, excuse me, background information on Ryan Ermeling and what Ryan did with the first company that he started and grew in a really incredible way, and then staged a successful exit in 2018. If you want to get some background on how all that came about and everything, I would just encourage you to go back and check out episode 12. We had a really good conversation. We talked about a lot of stuff. We kind of ran the gamut. I remember we talked a little bit about we had some spiritual conversation in there too, about the Lutheran faith, and we talked about not that it's different than the Christian faith, but we talked about your Lutheran roots and heritage and how the impact of that the Lutherans have had on the body of Christ and our understanding of grace, salvation by grace alone, and all of that. And so it was a really cool, I think, fun conversation, but definitely talked a lot about entrepreneurship and business. And I think there's a lot of value. So I just encourage you guys to check that out. We don't need to go back through all of those details again, Ryan, but just because I think it's going to help with some background for a couple of the questions that I want to ask you, if you
Mhm.
would just tell a little bit about that company that you founded in 2003, Stretch Internet, and just briefly like how that came about and what that company was and the service that it provided.
Sure. Yeah. No, I always love going down the memory lane. So out of college, I was a communications major and grad, and worked in athletic media relations for a couple of colleges in Southern California. And in my second one there, it was at Cal State Fullerton. There came a need for us to experiment with some in-house solutions for, at that point, just audio streaming, broadcasting the audio of our athletic games online. Right? There wasn't. It was pretty in the infant stages in terms of what was available out there. So we came up with
Mm-hmm.
a kind of an in-house solution, and really, Duke, I was not an entrepreneur by nature at that point. I mean, it took a few people to see what we were doing, and a couple said, "You should market that. Take it to other schools. There might be something there." And I was like, "Okay." I was young and naive, and said, "What the heck? Let's
Yeah.
let's try it." And it's kind of a right place, right time, within, just launched it in '03, not knowing what to expect, and had, I think, 12 schools the first year, 12 colleges that signed on, and it just grew steadily, double digits year over year over year, and got to the point, you know, 15 years later, where you read it at the beginning of the show, but we had about 40% of the collegiate marketplace, providing all the logistics and infrastructure and support to help these schools stream and broadcast their events online. A lot of this before it became ubiquitous. Right now, now streaming is you can do it on any platform, anytime, right? Pull
Yeah.
up your iPhone and click a button, and look what we're doing here, right? So,
Yep.
um, but a lot of this came before this was such commonplace, and so we were able to help schools navigate some of that technology when it wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is now, and had a lot of fun. I mean, it combined some of my loves, which are sports and communications and technology, and out of that, really, developed a passion for entrepreneurship and what it means
Mm,
to lead and to run a business and to um, in my case, use it as my calling, my vocation, spiritually as well. Right, I had the chance to really engage with a team of people, most of whom did not have an active faith, and so over time, I would say I grew my maturity over time in looking at it as my calling, from a kingdom perspective as well, right? I think when I was young
mm.
and just started, I was like, okay, this is just my job, right? And over time, I really started to see that fuse with this idea that, hey, this is where God's put me for a reason, and that became a fun piece to explore, and really kind of led to this next chapter that I'm pursuing now.
Yeah, man. So you were broadcasting and live streaming on the internet like before it was cool, right?
Well, I wouldn't say before it was cool because Mark Cuban was doing it. Mark Cuban sold his $4.7 billion. I think he sold
Hmm.
audio. I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically the same thing I was doing. So he was the first cool kid, right? And he leveraged that to the tune of $4.7 billion. So I think Cuban probably was a little bit cooler than I
He
was. But
saw
yeah,
he
I mean
saw
it.
some.
Yeah, yep, for sure. So I missed that by a few years, but yeah, it was still, I would say, the Wild West days of streaming back
Yeah.
then. Yep,
I mean, 2003, that was still like MySpace days, man. That was
yep,
before Facebook was a thing. That was still very early. And yeah, is it, I don't know, it must be cool to kind of look back and yeah, you weren't there for the, I mean, what you, Cuban was a little bit ahead and stuff like that, but to kind of be in that wave of something
mhm,
that's become so normal and so commonplace and so like I mean, how many churches around the world are live streaming now every single
yeah,
Sunday morning or,
right.
throughout the week as well and stuff like that. And something that's become so commonplace and so part of our culture. But yeah, kind of being around in those Wild West days, that's super cool. That's such a Lutheran thing to do, man. Like doing stuff before it's cool.
And I've never thought of it like that, but you're right. You're right.
disrupting the business of the church with
Yeah.
the truth of the word of God. And
Fortunately, I didn't have people coming after me and threatening my life for it, but yeah,
yeah,
it's a unique way to put it.
yeah. Well, it's funny because I mean, what we talk about a lot, or what I know on your heart a lot, relates to that world of kingdom-minded business, right?
Yeah,
And taking concepts and principles from the business world, which I really think that so many concepts that we see that work in the business world are actually biblical concepts, or started out as biblical concepts that we've adapted to work in the realm of business and entrepreneurship and things like that. But taking concepts and principles from the business world and sort of infusing them into ministry and into church life so that we can be more productive and go after things. And I think a lot of, some people get nervous when we start having these conversations because we don't want to make the church a business in the sense of, this is like about making money or this is about
yeah,
programs and productions and things like that. We never want it to become about that and losing the heart of what ministry is and why we do ministry in the first place. It's all about God. It's all about people. It's about building people and discipling people and bringing people into the kingdom and expanding God's kingdom throughout the earth. Of course, that's the heart and that's the goal. But there is this thing about you concepts from the business world that work in the kingdom as far as just ways that we can increase our productivity and that we can track things better and we can do different things in a way that produces results and that helps us reach those goals, right? To reach the goals of discipling people
mhm.
in a more productive way and expanding the kingdom of God and reaching the lost and all that kind of stuff. So would you explain a little bit about Seven Marches and what it's about, and yeah, just what you do.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a great intro to that concept. I mean, I look at it this way: either you know, if you read the Apostles' Creed, you know, the first article is all about creation, right? You either believe God created all things or He didn't. And so when we look at even things like business concepts and things that are using those were still created by human minds, right? Which were created
Hmm.
by God, and we know God can use all things and does use all things for good. And so I think, you know, there's no reason to think that God did not allow us to think through and develop some of these concepts and translate those into ways that we can now infuse them into ministry and also see benefits in ministry from some of those things. So that is kind of what we explore with Seven Marches, is walking through some of these components that I used in my business and that other leaders have used in their businesses for years, that really help them engage with their people, help them lead their people more effectively, help them set goals, help them execute on those goals, and ultimately attain. You know, I use the word momentum a lot, but that's what it's about. It's trying to attain momentum and traction in your business, right? And same thing applies for ministry. So there's a lot there, and we've had fun helping some ministries kind of flesh that out a little bit. We've got a systematic process that we walk through with organizations, and having fun develop some other side projects, which we can talk about today as well, that dive into that same premise. But you know, and it's not rocket science, Duke. I'm not the one who invented this. I mean, there are other folks out there that are doing some of this same stuff to a certain degree in a church space, but I don't think it's pronounced enough. And I think there is, to kind of what you pointed out a little bit, for lack of a better word, sometimes there is some fear, right?
Yeah,
If
for sure.
if we try to pursue some of these concepts and ideas from the business world, does that just make us look like we're profit driven? We're trying to, you know, just get more money in our coffers and figure out what can we do with that money, and you know, are we seeking the wrong things? Which I don't think is the case at all if you approach it from a healthy perspective, and you understand that it's all about doing kingdom work, right? So
Mm.
it's a fascinating conversation, and I enjoy exploring that with people too. So I enjoy exploring it with people who are kind of on the other side of the aisle in that conversation too. It's fun to have a healthy conversation about it.
Yeah, would you just kind of say what, in your opinion, being kingdom minded, we'll get into the ministry component too, but as far as like kingdom mindedness in business, like what does that look like to you? What does that mean for you from your perspective of just like what does it mean to be kingdom minded when it comes to business and entrepreneurship?
So, you know, I'm going to go back to my Lutheran roots again, right? And Luther has a great work on vocation, and Luther talked a lot about vocation and what that means.
Mm,
And you know, we're all called to unique vocations, careers, jobs, and you can even go beyond kind of what you're paid to do. You know, your vocation can be
yes.
as a spouse, as a parent, as a member of your community, et cetera, right? But I think in my mind, the idea of being a kingdom-minded business person, a kingdom-minded entrepreneur, is all about understanding that this is my vocation. This is where God's put me in this station in life. And how am I utilizing this to give him glory? How am I utilizing this to bring more people to know who he is, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know that I had that perspective really in my business. I
Mm,
tended to compartmentalize it, right? So I had my family life and personal life, and I prayed and you know, always asked God to come into that part of my life, and led my family that way. But I tended in my business world to say, I've got this. This is my area, right? And this is something that I'm in control, and never really embraced or adopted that idea that, hey, this is my vocation that God's given me. How can I use this to glorify him? How can I use this to
mm,
bring more people to know him? And so I think in a nutshell, that to me is the essence of a kingdom-minded entrepreneur, recognizing that yes, they might be in a profit-driven venture, right? But God's put them there for a reason, and they can use that for incredible blessing for the greater kingdom, right? To be a strong witness in a workplace, to help bring others to Christ, to lead in a way, even if it's not always with word, to lead in a way through action and uh, to inspire your team to say, hey, there's something different here, right? I want to know what that is. And so
Yeah.
I think it's that mindset, right? It's just that mindset that, hey, my vocation might be in a profit-driven venture, but God's using me here, and it doesn't have to be entrepreneur. We're talking about anybody, right?
Come
You
on.
can be a Amazon Prime driver, right?
Mhm.
And God, that's your vocation, right? God is put you there for a reason. And how do you approach each day with this idea that I'm here to serve? God has me here for a reason. What am I doing today to connect my vocation to this higher calling?
It's so good. Yeah, it's funny you brought that up about the, Amazon Prime driver, like, for God started teaching me, like, this principle, um, years ago when I was, driving for Uber. I was doing Uber driving on the side while I was in ministry and stuff like that, and for a while, my mindset was, "Ugh, like, I hate this. I wish I didn't have to do this. I don't want these people in my car." Like, it was that kinda thing, and then one day, the thing that was cool about the early days of Uber driving, at least, when it was early for us here in Mobile, Alabama, where I live, I started pretty early on, and there wasn't a whole lot of business to be had, but there were only a handful of drivers. But there was a lot of time waiting. There's a lot of waiting time where I'd be sitting in my car, and so I started to use that time as time to study or work on something. I use a lot of it as time to pray and read the word and stuff like that. And
Awesome.
so I'd be out there, and while I was in that process with, what I think was a kind of a pretty bad attitude about it, God started to speak to me, and he was like, "You know what? If this is where you are right now," and I knew that that wasn't God's, like, ultimate goal for my life, it was something for that season,
Yep.
but he's like, "If this is where you are right now, why don't you use this for my glory? Why don't you use this to actually serve people well? Why don't you use this to actually love people, to demonstrate who I am to people as they get into your car? Why not go into it? Why not approach it with that kind of a mindset?" And Ryan, I
Amen.
love that you talked about that compartmentalization thing, because so often I think that's what we do. We think about the quote unquote spiritual things that we do as those things where God is in the center of. So if I'm in ministry, then God's at the center of that. But if not, then I go to church on Sunday, I read my Bible, I do these different things, and those are the things that God's at the center of. But then I have
Yep.
the rest of my life where it's just kind of me out there making things happen. And it's so not true, because whatever God has called anybody to do, and as you said, whether that's business, whether it's to be a stay-at-home parent, whether that's to be
Yep.
in ministry, whether that's to work a job, to have a vocation, that whatever God has called you to do, wherever he's placed you in life, that you can walk into that situation with a kingdom-minded perspective of, I'm going to do all in this situation to the glory of God. And how
Yep.
can I serve well? How can I do this well? How can I serve the people well that I'm with? And Ryan, I think so often, like, when we talk about kingdom-minded business and kingdom entrepreneurship and stuff like that, I think so often where people's minds go is, how can we bring ministry into my business? And I think that that's very short-sighted. In other words, how can I make my business more spiritual? By praying for people while I'm doing business, while telling people about Jesus, while doing these things. And I think that I'm not saying that that should never be a part of that should never be a part of it. And if there are opportunities to do that, great. But what I'm saying is, I think when we relegate it to just that, to just like how I can make my business be more spiritual, then I think that we miss out on the greater picture, which is God has placed you where you are. He's given you that job. He's given you that business. He's given you that influence that you have in that place where you are, in order to demonstrate the kingdom, in order to represent him well in that place where you are. And so often I think that we can think that if I'm not doing something that we would stamp spiritual, that it's
Hmm.
not for the kingdom. And it's just not true. And there's so many ways that we can represent God well in the work or in the business or in the ministry or in whatever he's called us to do. And I just think that that's a perspective that I don't know. Like I struggled with for a long time, like getting that in my mind. And it's something that I feel like I'm still learning. But I think that it's so important because God has, wherever you are, whatever He's called you to do, He's got so much creativity for you in that
Yep.
situation. And you can learn how to tap into the creativity of God and His unique expression of Himself for what it is that He's called you to do. Again, it doesn't have to be ministry, and it doesn't have to be one of these activities that we would, call spiritual, because the fact that you are there and you're His
Yeah.
child, it
Hmm.
is spiritual because He's in you while you're doing that. And I think there's more to it than what we make it out to be so many times. Sorry for the rant there,
No,
but
you're absolutely right. I was Googling a little bit the first part when you were talking because I knew there was a good quote out there. So I pulled up this quote from Luther in one of his works on vocation, and this I think is a perfect way to sum this up. He says, "Work is no longer simply a job or occupation; it is a calling, a vocation. It is a summons from God. Vocation is also where the Spirit sanctifies a Christian's life, not in a self-centered quest for perfection, but rather in humble service to the neighbor." Right. So you mentioned the
it's
word
good.
serve, and I think that's what it's
Yeah.
all about, right? How are you using the position that God's put you in to focus on how you're serving the neighbor, which is ultimately going to bring glory to God, right? So
Mm,
you're spot on, dude.
that's so good. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think about people like Daniel in the Old Testament, who was in a very as secular of a position as you could be in a nation that was against God, or that didn't even recognize God, who, they had their own gods. And in that sort of pagan society where Daniel went to work for the king in a way that, like, his desire was to serve, right? His desire was to serve well, to love well. And he was loving people, and he was serving people that were not going after God.
Yeah.
But he from that place of influence and authority, God did some incredible things through him. But we don't really see Daniel walking around like, you guys are wrong, you need to start serving Jesus. Well, it wouldn't have been Jesus, but the God of
Right.
Abraham or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't
Right.
it wasn't that kind of an approach. It was, I'm in here, I'm in this place, and so let me use my position to serve well, to love well. And then I
Yeah.
think that what God does is He gives you, when you do that, when you use the position that He's given you to serve, then I think that He expands your influence so that people can begin to see. And it might even start from such a simple place of, like, what's up, Daniel? There's something different about you. Like,
Yep.
why is your life different?
Yep.
How is it? I see that it just seems like you've got so much stuff going for you. We call that God's favor, but like, things just seem to work out, or you don't seem to respond the same way as everybody else. You don't seem to freak out when things go wrong as much as everybody else does. And
Right.
just kind of being in that place, I think that God naturally expands the influence that you have and gives you opportunity to have those conversations and to speak into people's lives. But
Joseph
yeah,
from the Old Testament, another great
come
example,
on.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, just put in a position where he had opportunity. God's favor was on him, but he served, right, and he took that opportunity uh, to bring glory to God and to serve. So I mean, lots of great biblical examples of that.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you a question, kind of going back again to those earlier days of starting Stretch Internet. From being in a position where you had a good job as an SID, right, and transitioning from that into this place where you were launching your own business. Can you just talk a little bit, because I think that this is helpful for people. What was the process like for you, and how did you transition from working in a stable job position to owning and running your own business? What was that process like for you, and how did that all transpire?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm impressed. You know the terminology SID, Sports Information Director. Not a lot of people know that. So I'm not sure if you stole that from like bio somewhere, if you actually know what that is, but
Well, we
that's
talked about it
impressive.
last time. I'm pretty
Oh, okay. So
sure.
there you go. No, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think, listen, part of it, if I'm being honest, I touched on this earlier, is I was naive, right? So I was young enough to not know any better, to not know that failure is an option, or that failure is a possibility, right?
Yeah.
So you start up this idea and you just go, and you adapt and you fly. I didn't build a business plan. I didn't do any of that. I was like, hey, this is a cool idea. Let's just go and we'll figure it out as we move along. So I think part of it is you got to have this spirit of just courage and
Mm.
persistence. And it's funny now. I'm working on starting some other ventures, and I'm approaching it much differently. I'm planning more and testing and doing it more cautiously. And part of me just wonders, man, maybe I should just go all in on some of this and not worry about, because there's something to this, the idea of being naive, because when something doesn't work out, you just say, okay, no big deal. I'll figure it out. I'll pivot. I'll do this. I'll do that. So part of it was just having that mindset. But, one of the benefits I had was Stretch Internet grew slowly enough, and I intentionally kept my other job, my day job, if you will. And there's I'm a big fan of Chip and Dan Heath, if you've ever read any of their stuff.
Mm.
They've wrote a lot of great business type books, and one of them is called Decisive. I'm trying to think of it's all about the process of making better decisions. And I might be butchering that title. So I go back to it all the time, but for some reason, you might want to Google Chip and Dan Heath and make sure I've got that title right. But one of the things they talk about in there is a concept that they call OOCH, OOCH. How do you OOCH? And it's almost this try before you buy philosophy, right? Where
Okay.
is there a
Mhm.
way to test something out on a smaller scale before you dive in head first? And that's something I always recommend to young entrepreneurs. Is listen, if we look at the numbers don't lie. Most businesses fail, right? If not in the first year, then within 2 or 3 years, and it's just the law of averages, just the numbers. And I don't necessarily want people to embrace that mindset, right? We just talked about being naive and saying, hey, failure is not a possibility. But on the other hand, if at all possible, I encourage young entrepreneurs to have something that still is going to allow them to put food on the table,
Mm.
to know that, hey, if this doesn't work out for whatever reason, or if it's a slow roll and it takes a while to gain momentum, I've got this on the side. And some people are going to argue with this. They're going to say, nah, you need to go all in because it makes you hungry, and it makes you go for it. So I don't know if I'm just a little more conservative in that regard, but I think there's really something to this idea that you can ooch, you can test the waters, you can start to build this, see how it works, make sure that it's progressing and that there's a market and that you're serving people well, and then you can go all in, which I did. So I did both jobs for a year, and listen, it wasn't easy. I mean, I was working 90, 100-hour weeks with two young
Whew.
kids, right? And nowadays, I don't know that I'd have the energy to do that, right? But in your mid 20s, you have a little more stamina, and again, I just went after it. So after a year, though, I was like, okay, this has some legs, and I can dive into this full time. So that's something I usually suggest to folks is, if you can, try to ooch, try to test something out, see how it works, get some life behind it, make sure there's some market viability to whatever it is you're building or launching or trying.
Mm.
And that way you have a fallback. And um, I think that's a smart conservative way to do it. Like I said, some of the folks who go on Shark Tank might argue with me, but I think that's a smart way to do it. And the other thing too is, I think a lot of people say, hey, I want to be my own boss. I want to start something new. And they just go find something out there that may not be a passion or may not be connected to their current work.
Wow.
And I think that's maybe a recipe for disaster too, because it's going to be hard to sustain passion with something that either you don't have a connection to or a love for. In my case, my Stretch Internet was birthed out of my existing job, right? It was something I knew, something I enjoyed. I had connections in the field, so it would just made it so much easier to transition into that space. So,
Mm.
um, so those are a couple things. I mean, there are a number of other of things we could talk about, but those are two that quickly come to mind in terms of people that are thinking, how do I transition into to maybe running my own business, or to starting my own idea, or to launching my own whatever it is.
Yeah, I love that, man. How important, or how much of a big deal do you think it was for you that the business you were building was directly coming out of something that you were passionate about, mainly, athletics, and it was something that I imagine that did you enjoyed the job that you had before you started the business? Like, it wasn't something you were
Yep.
trying to escape from?
No, no, I loved it, man. It was a perfect combination of my skill set and my interests. And I'm a huge baseball fan. I love technology. I love writing. I'm a little bit of a math geek. I love statistics, and so it combined all these elements, right? And
Yeah.
in fact, the last game I worked at Cal State Fullerton was the 2004 College World Series championship when they beat Texas and in baseball, and so I loved it. I loved it, but there was just an opportunity there. And to answer your question, it can be pretty important to have that. For me, it was important because I had built-in connections. I had credibility already. The people that I was selling to were some of my tribe, right? So I could
Mm,
come into this place and talk to sports information directors at other school and say, hey, here's a new business I'm launching, and here's how I've used it in your chair, right? I'm in your role, and here's how it
yeah.
helped me. So you have immediate credibility, right? And I think that can be really important if you can find an idea that's um, a spin-off of an area you're already in. You have more credibility, you have more contacts in a marketplace. You can speak to your customer so organically because you understand their pain points, right? A good product or service is going to address a legitimate pain point or problem or opportunity. And if you've been on that other side, and you understand precisely what that opportunity or pain point or problem is, I mean, that gives you an incredible leg up in trying to chase down business in that market, because you
Yeah.
you know you can empathize with that potential client like no one else can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, going back to what you said before too, I think that unless you really have a word from the Lord where God is saying, stop doing what you're doing and just trust me to jump into this new venture, like, just dive in. Unless
Yeah,
you have that, I don't think that that's the right solution for most people, especially for people that are doing something on their own for the first time. Because I think that when you go through that transitionary period of doing it the way that you did it, where, okay, you had a job, and then basically in your extra time, in your free time, you had another full-time job, which was you building your business. But I
hmm,
think that there's some very valuable things that are learned in that process, right? Like, some things that you learn how to be disciplined enough to do that. Because, it's one thing to get up and go to work every day because you have a boss, and if you don't show up consistently, you're going to get fired. It's another thing to be completely on your own, and you're the boss and you're calling the shots, and you've got to
yeah,
manage yourself as an employee. You know what I mean? That's a completely different thing. And I
yep,
think that sometimes people underestimate the amount of discipline that it takes to actually do that. And I think sort of having that transitionary period where you've got to, you've still got your job that you're working, but then you are building something else on the side, you kind of get a chance to see what you're made of, so to speak. And I think that you develop a lot of good habits during that period that translate, really well into, when you're able to step out and really do that full time and build your business full time.
yeah,
So I
well
really
said.
like what you're saying there as far as if it's possible for you. And I think that there's something really unique about the days that we're living in, Ryan, right now, of the internet, and the fact that, like, you can work, if you, let's just say you have a 9 to 5 job, you can do that, and then you can spend a few hours in the evening where you're building your business, because
Mhm.
it's not like it was, 50, 60 years ago where at 5 o'clock, like everything is closed. So like, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be like, how are
Right.
you building your business?
Right.
But we have the opportunity now, because so much of building business takes place online, and with different resources and tools that are available to us, that we really can sort of work on our, whether it's a passion project or a side hustle or a business idea or whatever it is, we can pour into that thing in the time that we have left over, even if all we have are like weird hours or nighttime hours or things like that. There's just the ability to do that these days with everything that's available to us,
Yep.
because time doesn't really matter so much. Sometimes, if you got to be making phone calls to people, that could be an issue. You don't want to do that at midnight, but
Right.
but a
Right.
lot of the growth, a lot of the stuff that we do in terms of building business can happen in the evening hours and when we have those sort of, times that we find. But I just think that going through that process of building on the side before you jump into something completely, as you said, to make sure that it's going to work, to see if there's a need for it, to see if people are responding to it, if you're going to be able to support your family. I think that for most people, again, unless you have a word from the Lord where he says, do this. So,
I'm back. Sorry, that looked like network difficulties there.
so let me ask you another question. Do
Yeah.
you feel like, trying to think how to phrase this. Um, w- do you think it required, when you were still working your job and then building your business on the side, to when you went into running your business full time, which
Mhm.
one of those two um, modes of life, and which one of those two modes of building a business was more difficult or required more discipline, or do you think it was the same, just well different, but
Well,
does,
I'd
does
say
the question
more.
I'm asking make sense? I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to phrase it.
I mean, I don't think there's any question it was more difficult when I was doing both, right? I mean, it's just a grind. I
Yeah.
mean, I would get up and again, we had two small kids too. So sometimes my wife was still working, and she was a full-time music teacher at a Lutheran high school in Orange County. And so sometimes I'd be helping with the kids, and then she'd come home. And my boss at my day job was flexible enough that he'd let me come in sometimes at lunch, but then I'd work there till 7 or 8, and then come home
Mm,
and maybe kiss the girls goodnight, and then go work in my office till 12 or 1 in the morning.
wow.
So that's just a lot of work, right? And you've got to have the discipline to stay committed and work through fatigue. So in my mind, there's no question that was a more difficult chapter. It's a different kind of difficult when you're full fledged into the business and that's your focus, and then it's more um, just hopping on a roller coaster, right? And realizing that there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be challenges. There's going to be um, just daily things you have to deal with. But it's it's a roller coaster for real. Roller coaster is exciting, even during the downs. It's exciting, right? And so I think
Hmm.
that's an important thing too. Is if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to embrace all those turns, all those ups and downs, because they're part of your story, and you can learn from everything. You can learn from the wins, you can learn from the losses, and they give you they just make you who you are, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was, I look back at some of those early moments and just little things and little challenges. It seemed insurmountable at the time. I mean, I'll give you one example. We had right when we started, everything was in my garage. I was like this classic garage startup business, right? So we had 17 computers and 72 phone lines coming into my garage,
Yeah.
right? And who has 72 phone lines? Because that's how we got our audio for the streaming of that. People would call in to broadcast a game over a phone line. So it would come in over a phone line, and then we'd connect it into our computers in the garage and stream it out. But one of the
That's so
early
funny.
problems is I did it. I got all this equipment, set it up, did a test, called in on the phone line, and the audio coming into the computer was like a whisper. You could barely hear it. I'm
Mm,
like, oh man, what are we going to do? I don't know how to fix this, you know? And my wife, who's a musician, says, just go down to Guitar Center and get a little preamp. And so I go get a preamp and
it's awesome.
didn't even know what it was, but connect a little 1/4 inch cable into the front and then the 1/4 inch out, and I adjust the gain on the preamp, and all of a sudden the audio sounds perfect, right? So
Mm,
um, little, and some challenges are much bigger than that one, right? But it's just this daily uh, battle with these obstacles that come to you, and that you have to figure out how to deal with, how to overcome. And it's just a fun part of the story. But you have to approach it with the idea um, that it is part of your story, that you are going to learn from it, that you are going to overcome. So I guess I want to hedge my bets here. On one hand, I talk to you about make sure it's going to work and take your time and have something to fall back on. But on the other hand, you do, especially when you commit full on, you got to say, hey, this is going to work, and we're going to figure out a way to make it work. Because at that point, you're all in, right? You don't have a choice, so you've got to have that kind of discipline. So to answer your initial question, I would almost answer it in two different ways. I would say it was more difficult when I was doing both, but I
mm-hmm.
almost would say it required more discipline when you launch, because at that point you've got
Yeah.
to really just stay committed. You've got to have good rhythms. You've got to be able to be persistent, and so there's a lot of discipline required in those early stages of starting a business.
Yeah. No, that's really good. That's really, really good. What kind of, call it advice, I guess, would you give to somebody who's in a position where, they do have something that they're passionate about, and, something that they would like to start on, or maybe they're in the very early stages of it or something like that. But they want to launch out on their own, and, they want to add value around whatever it is that they're passionate about. And just sort of like some maybe first steps or things like that you would recommend to somebody to just kind of get started and get the ball rolling.
Yeah, that's a great question, Duke. The first thing that I would suggest, and I'll be honest, I didn't really do this with Stretch Internet, but I'm doing it
Mhm.
now as I look at some other ventures. But it's to test the marketplace, understand if there's truly a need for what you're passionate about starting. So can I give you an example from what I'm working on
Please.
now? So last time you and I spoke, one of the things that I was really excited about was this concept called Measure.Church, and
Mhm.
it was an offshoot of Seven Marches. And again, bringing a business principle, and the business principle here is this idea that we should look at. In this case, it was worshipers almost as customers, and I don't mean that as profit centers. I mean that more as they have ideas and desires and wants and needs, and how are we as a church understanding those, and how are we measuring those and quantifying those so that we can better adapt and be flexible and make sure that we're serving our people well, right?
Mm.
Well, I went out and talked to lots of pastors. I did surveys. I tested the waters. And I'll be honest, I found out that the market interest is not there yet. I think I'm early. And we got some interesting feedback, and a decent level of interest, but not to the extent where I felt that this is ready to launch. But
Mm.
during that process, I had some conversations with people, and it led me to talk to a few Christian school administrators, principals, heads of school, and their antenna went up when I talked about this, because they're like, holy cow, our parents are legitimately and literally customers, right? There's no
Wow.
there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Mhm.
Our parents are paying tuition money, and they expect the service, and we don't always do a great job of understanding what our parents are thinking about our school. And so Measure.Church is still there, but I pivoted now to something called Parent Pulse. And that's actually, we're launching that in beta form here in the next month. And this is going to be based on now the market need. And I went out and I talked to, again, dozens of Christian schools, and really put feelers out there and understood, yeah, there's more of a need and a desire and a want for this type of product in a Christian school marketplace than there is in a church marketplace at this point.
Mm.
And the only way I determined that was from conversations and due diligence and research. And so I think there's that would be the number one thing I would talk to somebody who's got an idea and wants to get going, is make sure that idea has merit in the marketplace. Because you can have the best idea in the world, you can have something that brings you the most passion and energy and excitement, but at the end of the day, if there's nobody else that shares that vision for it and is wanting to use it, then it's not going to go very far, right? It's going to be a hobby for
Mm,
you that doesn't bring in any money, and
yeah.
maybe that's fine with you, right? And for me, Parent Pulse, honestly, I'm excited about it, even if it doesn't bring in. It's not. I'm not building it for the money piece, right? So there are situations where money doesn't have to be the predominant determining factor, but determine the marketplace need. Is there a viability for your product, your service, your idea in the market before you really start going?
Wow, you just touched on something that I think is so important, and it's this idea of you started down one avenue, and then throughout the process of testing and working on it and marketing and different things through like in the midst of the process of building that thing, you actually discovered that there was another direction that you could go that was going to work better for the season that you were in currently, right? And so that idea, I think that so often we're so afraid to move forward on something because of that question in our mind of, well, what if this doesn't work? Or what if it's not the right thing? Or what if it's not received well? Or whatever. And we can be afraid to get started on something because we're not sure how it's going to turn out. But what's really cool to me is that you probably never would have ended up with the Parent Pulse if you hadn't first started with Measure.Church, right? It
100%.
was like going down that avenue that allowed you to see that opportunity that you might not have been able to see otherwise. And I just think that process of just kind of getting started and taking those first steps and being bold enough to step out in faith on the things that God has showed you and that he's spoken to you about. I think that it's so important to start moving, to start putting your feet to it, even if it's like, we talk about not despising small beginnings and stuff like that, and sometimes we can be afraid to get started because it just seems like we don't have the resources to get us all the way to the end. But what you don't realize is that as you take those first steps, the picture begins to open up more and it becomes clearer and clearer. And sometimes, as you said, it pivots or it shifts or whatever the case may be. But I just think that that's so cool how that happens, that when you step out and you start taking those steps and just embark on the adventure of discovering new things, that's where you actually find out, you discover so many of the missing pieces of the puzzle that you'll never get to if you just kind of stay still and wait for everything to materialize in front of you, you know?
That's yeah, well said. So, not sure if you heard of the book Canoeing the Mountains. Todd Bolsinger, he works at Fuller Seminary in
It
Pasadena.
sounds
I think
familiar,
he's
but I'm sure I have not read it.
okay. So he wrote this book called Canoeing the Mountains, and it's all about the idea of how specifically churches adapt, right? And so the concept and the reason it's called Canoeing the Mountains is Lewis and Clark, right, started on this expedition to figure out where the uh, Mississippi River ran into the ocean, right? And all of a sudden they
Mm.
hit this thing called the Rocky Mountains, and they're like, well, our canoes aren't gonna do much good right now, right? So they had to figure out
Yeah.
how do we now get across these mountains, right? With no river, so they're literally just all of a sudden changing and having to adapt and be flexible on
Mm.
the fly in the face of this new challenge. And what he makes a great point in this book, to your point, Duke, about adapting and seeing where God leads and letting him connect the dots. And I'm going to paraphrase the story, but when he took this, he was a parish pastor, church pastor, and he took this job at Fuller to start a new program there. And one of his mentors at Fuller came up, I think, on his first or second day of the job and said, "Hey, what I want you to do is focus on failing as fast as you can in this, because
Mm.
then you can get to your plan B, and then you can fail at that and you get to your plan C, and eventually you're going to get to God's plan A, which is probably your plan L or your plan M, right?"
Uh-huh.
So in other words, we've got to move. We've got to not be afraid to pivot and to take that next step and to maybe change directions, because God
Yeah.
is using these experiences to lead us to ultimately his end, right, to his plan for us. And sometimes he has us take detours intentionally for whatever reasons that we know or maybe won't know, right? We don't always understand his plans and his ways, but we've got to trust that he's using those to eventually get us to the spot where he wants us to be.
It's really good. All right, Ryan. So let's get into. I want to get a little bit more, just a little bit deeper on Seven Marches and some of the. We've alluded a few different times to some of the things that are, on the horizon for the near future here, and some things that you're working on now.
Yeah.
How much can you talk about today?
Well, we can talk about whatever you'd like. Yeah, I mean, Seven Marches is going strong. I'm having fun working with primarily churches at this point, and helping them cast vision. We go in there and we start with it's called Seven Marches for a reason, right? We go through 7 series, and we call the strategic march, which is what a lot of our churches do, is really just the first 3 marches, and that's where we start by formulating your values, your mission, your vision narrative, what makes you unique, right? And then from there, we start to think, how is this all attached to where God's leading us in 5 or 10 years, in 3 years, in 1 year, 90 days? We get very granular. And then March 3 is all about, now how do we execute on this, right? Let's put a
Mm,
plan together. So you start with stuff very fundamental to who you are, what your DNA is all about. You move into then casting a vision, and then from there you go into the execution phase. So we're doing that strategic march, those first 3 marches with a lot of our churches, and having a lot of fun seeing them get momentum and traction. And but yeah, a lot of my attention lately has been on Parent Pulse 2, which is a little bit of a shift, right? It's still working with Christian organizations, but now it's schools, which is fine for me because I have a passion for Christian education. I preschool
mm.
through college in Christian schools. My wife is a Christian school teacher. Um, I'm on the board of regents of my alma mater, Concordia University in Irvine, California. So Christian education is near and dear to my heart. And so this opportunity to create a product that brings this business idea, this concept of listening to your customers, I'll call them, to Christian schools, and helping empower them. The ultimate goal is to help them to retain more students, right? If you're listening
Right.
better to your people, you're going to be more engaged. You're going to understand maybe some concerns or frustrations they have, and hopefully adapt and make some changes or add some initiatives that are going to keep more people at your school. And I talk with schools about KROI, Kingdom Return on Investment, right? And if you can implement a feedback program like this and hear from even one family that has concerns that you weren't aware of, now you can engage with that family in a conversation, ultimately keep that family in your school where you might not have been able to otherwise because you would have no idea they had concerns, right? They never come to you. I call them silent parents, right? You
Right.
don't hear about these concerns unless you're intentionally asking for their feedback. Let's say that family's only connection to Jesus is through your school. They don't have a church home. There's no faith background in their family, but their kids in your school, he's hearing about Jesus. He's going to chapel. He's bringing stuff home that you're seeing, and learning about Jesus in the home. Now, if you're able to retain that family, think about the kingdom return on investment there, right?
Mm.
How is God going to work through that family? So it's, again, this tool, I hope brings some great KROI to these schools. There's some other really tangible benefits too, in terms of saved retention revenue, and intangible benefits in terms of having data to help inform your planning and your strategy. And so there's lots of benefits to it. But that's been a big focus of my time over the past 6 months or so, is building out this software platform and starting to build the marketing funnel content. And one thing that's interesting is I'm a reader, so that's why I keep mentioning books. But there's another great book called Hooked, and it's how you make a product habit forming. And he talks in there about the idea that most products, especially in the software world, are either painkillers or vitamins, right? A painkiller is something that meets a very obvious need, something that's it's causing pain for your customer. A vitamin is going to make you stronger and healthier, but you don't always realize you need it. You don't necessarily pursue it. Parent Pulse is probably more of a vitamin. And because of that, you have to work harder to educate and tell people and show people what the benefits are, right? So that's one thing that I'm realizing, but enjoying, and building out
Yeah.
content that's going to help educate people to why this is so important. My hope, Duke, is that eventually we can take this and then add Measure.Church back into the mix, because I do think there's a need for this in churches as well. I think there's still, I think we're early, and I think too many churches still, I'll say pastors instead of churches. Too many pastors either don't want to embrace this idea that our worshipers are in some ways customers, they're consumers, or they're scared of what they're going to hear. Right? They're fearful, which I get,
I
right?
think it's
And
probably more the second one,
it
if
very
I
well
had to
could be.
guess.
And those
But
are some of the things I heard, but that gets back to our earlier point, right? I had to have those conversations to learn that, right? If I had just launched this blindly and put it in the marketplace, I don't know that it would have had the response that I would have liked. But because I had those conversations with people, I realized this is probably not quite ripe enough
yeah,
um, to move forward. So the school side's been fun to explore, though, and so I'm still having fun going through these marches with organizations. But as a former, a Stretch Internet, a tech guy and a software guy, bringing that back into play now with Parent Pulse has scratched an itch for me too, because I forgot how much I enjoy building out software and going through that process of seeing how you can use that to meet a real need.
that's really cool. Are you actually building it yourself?
So I'm not
Or
a software developer. Yeah. So we have um, a firm that we work with in Salt Lake City that's doing it. They offshore all of their work to Brazil, so we save money on the code. But all the project managers, who are also, most of them are from Brazil too, are in Salt Lake City, and
okay.
so I have a local project managers, but we're able to save some money with the work by having them offshore it to Brazil. So yeah, it's been fun working with them and here's another interesting piece: is they're almost all LDS, almost all Mormon, and so it's fun to have conversations with them about why I'm doing this and the faith component of it, and kind of get into a little bit of a evangelism with them as well.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of a fun little side journey on this as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, how does the actual process work with, so you're going to lead let's just say a church through the marches,
Yeah.
right? And so you're helping them implement a strategy to see greater growth and momentum developed and stuff like that. How does that actually happen, as far as like, do you or somebody from your team, are you going to them? Like, are you
Mhm.
meeting with their leadership team?
Yeah.
And or is there an aspect where you have to see, like, boots on the ground, and you have to kind of see their ministry in happening, or does it happen, from a
Yeah.
distance? How does the actual process of that work? I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, good question. No, we have a 2-day kickoff that I'm at, and I insist that it's on site at their campus,
Cool.
because I want to get, to your point, I want to get a feel for things. I want to talk to people that maybe aren't part of the leadership team we're working with. I want to get a sense for their physical space. Sometimes you can tell what's important to people and not important. Just getting eyes in their physical space. Want to see how they operate. How they interact with each other. So yes, we're in a world of Zoom, and we do a lot of follow-ups over that type of format. But we do an initial 2-day kickoff meeting where we walk through these, and it's intense. But it's 2 days where we walk through these 3 marches, and we have practical tools that we guide them through for each phase of each march. And we cap our team. We allow them to choose up to 7 people. There's a lot of research into what's called the rule of 7, which is the minute you have a group of more than 7 people, the decision-making abilities of that group goes down dramatically. And this is all tested and research-driven, right? So they've done a lot
Wow.
of studies to show that. I made the mistake a couple years back of working with a church, and this is before I kind of had researched and adopted this rule, but they had 22 people show up to our march, and it was, I mean, we still got to where we needed to be, but it was pulling hair, and it was a painful process. Let's put it that way. So I've learned from that, right? And now we allow them to choose up to 7 people, and we spend 2 days and we get after it. And so out of that 2 days, then they walk away with a game plan for the next 90 days, and what needs to happen over those 90 days. And so then we coach them. I usually am on a call every couple of weeks for an hour, see how things are progressing, walk them through their meeting rhythms, make sure that they're effectively interacting with their team and chasing the right things and addressing obstacles. Or, a lot of times shiny objects will come up, right? So they'll be halfway through our 90 days and they'll say, oh, we were thinking now maybe we should do this. And so sometimes it's just trying to truly understand, well, why all of a sudden are you thinking this is more important, right? Because we generally do not try to, at least in a 90-day window, change track. We want them to focus on what they said it was important, because there's a good reason that you said it was important at the beginning of this period, right? After 90 days, we do what's called a quarterly reset. So if indeed there's something new and has a higher priority as it relates to our mission, vision, values that we talked about in our 5-year goal that we talked about, then great, we can pivot after 90 days. And so we'll talk about that, but it's really within those 90 days, trying to get them to stay focused on those 2 to 3 things that we said are going to be the most important things for us to gain that momentum toward that goal. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's just an example of something, whether it's a real life example or something you just, something more general, but what's an example of something that might be happening during that 90-day period of something that's changing as far as the focus, or something that's being focused on during those 90 days?
That might cause them to want to change their trajectory?
No, I just mean, like, so you have the 2-day where you're going through this intense sort of not, I don't know,
Process.
training set. Yeah, we'll just call it a process. And then they're coming out of that with a strategic plan for the next 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
What's like something that they would actually be implementing in that 90-day period?
Oh, I got it. So yeah, I'll
Coming
give
out
you an
of their,
example from a church I worked at just recently in Southern California. And it's a church with honestly, there's more life in their preschool right now than the church. And you had some staff that didn't necessarily see eye to eye on which was driving the growth and the life. And so through that process, we had some great discussions and great talks. And we came out of that with a 90-day plan. It was really a people-based plan, and understanding that we needed to make sure that they had the right people in the right places to help their ministry move forward. They didn't have a really high-level functioning board. There was some uncertainty about whether the board oversaw the church or the school, so we needed to put definition around that. They didn't have enough volunteer leaders in place. There were a couple of preschool teachers that were leaving, and they weren't sure how to replace them. So it became pretty clear that for this ministry to move forward, we got to fix the people issues. So that our 90-day priority became all about people, became about developing a more structured board and also delegating the roles and helping the board understand what their role was, what they oversaw, how they were going to interact with the staff. It became about getting after these couple of preschool teachers, hiring them, and what that process would look like. It became about researching better ways to recruit and identify and train volunteers. And so that was really their 90-day goal, was all people-based. How can we infuse and get more organized around the people that are working towards this ministry? So they were just nearing that 90 days, and they've made some great progress with that. They've hired both their teachers now. They're just about to launch a new volunteer kickoff program. They've got some better board documentation. So it just helped them feel more organized. And now they've got the people. It's hard to do ministry without the right people in place, right? So we had to fundamentally identify that has to happen before we can focus on what you actually want to do with your ministry. Let's start by getting the right people, and then maybe the next 90 days, if you've been successful, then we can say, what are we going to do with these people? So,
yeah, this whole ministry thing would be a whole lot easier without the people, huh?
Yeah, it's
complicates
so funny.
things.
I mean, I found that with my business too. As I grew, the biggest blessing was my people. The biggest pain was my people. Right?
Yeah.
I love the chance to have these colleagues and go to battle in the trenches with them. But then the biggest headaches were usually things going on with my people too. So
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag.
Well, it's so funny because it really is. I mean, I think building the culture of an organization is always the most it's so foundational to your long-term growth and success and everything. So whether you're talking about a business or a ministry or a family or whatever it is, like, we can really get so focused on the products and the programs and the things like that, but building the people and, like, paying attention to the culture of the people and the relationships and, like, the inner workings and the communication and things like that are so key, and, like, we can ignore those things because, like, we can almost be oblivious to some of the internal problems that are happening on the interpersonal level,
Yeah,
and just kind of being content with some mediocre results that we're getting because it's kind of working.
yeah,
But when you start to kind of pinpoint those things, which again, I just imagine that probably a lot of what it comes down to, I'm sure not in every situation, but probably like as you get in there and you're working with a leadership team and you're going through things, I imagine that often you would probably find issues with people in
yeah.
terms of like things that need to be adjusted in terms of either the way that communication's happening or I think one of the are so who, well, this person he's got this title, he's the administrator, this person. And so like so many times I find with ministry organizations, there tends to be some confusion, and often processes are not streamlined because things have just kind of, I think things happen naturally over time, especially if you're seeing growth. So if you started
Yeah.
with 100 people and you had a few people in in leadership positions, and then a few years go by, now you've got 500 people and you've got different departments that are kind of forming. But what I mean, I think there's a way that we kind of like copy and paste things sometimes, and we can end up with something that's kind of like a rat's nest as far as a what do you call it, like a corporate structure or whatever,
Yes.
and there can be
Yep.
confusion. So
Yeah.
anyway, I don't know
Well,
why I
and
went
and
there, but
no, that's a great point. One of my good friends and a former pastor of mine, you know, made a point that the church is the most complex organization in the world because
mm,
think about some of these things, right? For instance, you'll have a lot of pastors that become a CEO overnight as their first job, right? They'll come out of seminary and they're maybe placed as a sole pastor to church, and as a 22, 24, 26 year old, they're basically a CEO, right? So you have that factor. Then you add the whole piece of volunteers. I mean, what other organization requires so much of their work, their traction to be handled by volunteers, right? And how do you hold volunteers accountable? There's just so many
yeah,
complexities to the idea of people in a church, in a ministry. And so you're spot on. I mean, a lot of the work that we do and a lot of things we see are helping people kind of get uh, their shops in order, so to speak, on the people front. And that's why one of our marches is actually, we call it the missionary march, and we don't mean missionary in terms of somebody serving overseas in Ghana, right? A missionary is somebody who is actively a proponent of and helping advance your mission. And that can be a volunteer, that can be a full time staff member, that certainly could be a traditional overseas missionary as we think of that term in a church space, right?
yeah,
But one of our marches is all about how you organize those people, how you evaluate those people, how you hire, and even if you need to fire those people, um, and really helps churches become better equipped to deal with the people part of their ministry.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, I was muted. I got a comment here. As a pastor and one who works with coaching for pastors, I can tell you pastors are afraid of what they will hear, and they never want to offend people.
Yeah.
Um, and so he was saying we need programs like Measure.Church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
No, I
think that yeah.
that's a great comment. He's right, right? And so it's that vitamin that I talked about, right? It's,
hmm
most pastors don't realize it's going to make them stronger and healthier, and so how do we educate them? Um, and in this case, like I said, I think Measure.Church hopefully still has some a future there, but it's going to take some time for us to educate and
Mm,
to help pastors understand how important that is, right? And you can't just do that overnight. Um, so we'll see how that progresses. But that mindset is exactly right. So many pastors are just fearful, and it's also the tyranny of the urgent too, right? There's so much going on in daily ministry that they think, I don't have time to go out and you know look at surveys and data and feed. It's God put me here for a reason, and I know what's going on, and I can lead this place. And so I developed something. We might have talked about this in our last podcast, but I call it the 4 feedback personas. And these are the
yeah.
different personas people adopt, and one of those is um, what I call loner Lori. And loner Lori is a person that says, God put me here. I know what needs to happen. I have the vision. I can implement. And it's just it's a shortcoming. It's an oversight, because yes, God did put you there for a reason, but He also puts you in the midst of people you serve.
Yes.
And if you don't understand and can't connect well with the people you serve, you're going to be, I don't want to say highly ineffective. You can probably still be effective, but you're missing out probably on so much opportunity if you can't if you don't work to proactively understand your people and where they're at.
Wow. That's such a really cool illustration that you use of the, painkiller or like taking the pill to take your pain away as opposed to taking the vitamins ahead of time. And I
Hmm.
think that that is really true a lot of times with our approach to things is, we'd rather just kind of run something into the ground. Not that that's our goal or our mindset. We don't realize that we're doing it. So we'd rather sort of run something however we want to talk about that in my own strength or without somebody's help because I want to be a loner Lori or because I want to, feel like I can do things on my own or whatever, whatever the reason behind it is or whatever maybe it's an ego situation or maybe it's just ignorance or whatever, but we'll run something and rather than engaging in a process throughout that's going to help us have long-term success, we'd rather get to that point where things are so bad that now we need something that's going to be a quick fix.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're talking about there, like that mindset shifting, it's really needed. I mean, when you look at the highest level people in the world in anything, in like the high level CEOs of the world, the high level athletes of the world, what do they have in common? They all have coaches. They all have
Hmm.
people that, they're not just out there doing it by themselves. They have people that are able to speak into their lives and to tell them like this is not the best way to do this or this maybe worked last season but it's not what's needed for the season that you're in now, and so we've got to make some shifts and some adjustments. And yeah, I think a lot of times we do get into fear and pride and stuff like that, and it causes us to not see the levels of growth that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's human nature, right? And
For
and
sure.
so so I understand that, but that's part of my crusade is to, again, getting back to this idea that there's some business principles that, yeah, they might induce a little bit of fear, but if you can embrace them and understand how they can positively impact your ministry and your organization, there's a world of opportunity out there. There
Mm,
really is. And there was a study done um, where they looked at about 2,000 different innovations that across like 6 or 7 different industries. I mean, completely different industries. And they just picked all these different innovations that had happened over the years. And then they sourced those innovations. Where did the ideas come from? And over 60% of them came from customers. right? And so you look at that, you think about that in the church or the school, Christian school world, right? How many great ideas are sitting there in the minds of your people, right? How many ideas for ministry? How many ideas for how you run your organization, how you operate? How many great ideas are sitting in the members or in the minds of your people, but you don't have a systematic way of asking and getting those ideas and fleshing those out, right?
Wow.
And so there's a real practical side to this too. It's not just understanding, hey, what are we not doing well? It's you could legitimately become a healthier and more proactive and more vibrant organization just by having a systematic way of better
Mm,
collecting and incorporating feedback from your people.
that's really good. Let me ask you one metadata question sort of here. Like, how did you acquire with 7 Marches, how did you find your first, just say couple of clients or, whether they were
Yep.
churches or ministries that you were working with? How did that work for you?
Well, so I mentioned with Stretch, that was so important to me because I was already in the business, right? So I had these
Mhm.
contacts, and your first customers become people that you knew, that you worked with, that were in your circle. Same thing with Seven Marches. My Lutheran roots run pretty deep, and so having opportunities like serving on the board of regents at Concordia University in Irvine, having a wife who teaches in a Lutheran school, having a dad who's a retired Lutheran pastor. I've got a lot of roots, specifically in the Pacific Southwest. And so tapping into those resources, reaching out to the president of we call it a district here. It's the Pacific Southwest District, which incorporates 300 to 400 congregations, churches in Southern Nevada, California, Arizona. Just kind of beginning, taking that relationship, saying, "Here's what I'm working on. Do you know any people that are in need of this type of thing?" That led to some immediate traction and opportunities, and then from there, it's word of mouth, right? It's like most healthy organizations and businesses. So much of it's word of mouth. People talk, and so if you were able to help someone and maybe bring some life to their ministry, they're usually not shy to share that, right, with their colleagues and the people that they run into in their inner circles. So, but really just tapping in initially to kind of my own network of people that know
Yeah.
me and have an understanding of my history and what I can bring to the table and how I think and how I work. I think that's huge. So I haven't done a lot of proactive marketing yet. It's been mostly just tapping into my own network and letting those people hopefully talk as they get to experience it.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I imagine that you probably acquire some clients and you start the process, and then some of those clients can become sort of like a spokesperson, so to speak. Not that they're
Yep.
out there doing it constantly, but they can, what do they call those things? Not referrals, but where
Testimonials.
the testimonials, thank you.
Yeah.
Things like that. So has that been an important piece of the
For sure, for
growth?
sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, customers speak so much louder than you ever can. I remember my
Mhm.
days with Stretch Internet specifically. There'd be times where I would go to present to athletic conferences. Usually 8, 10, 12 schools, and all their athletic directors would be in a room. And I might come into that room and have, out of those 8, 10, or 12 schools, maybe one or two were already working with Stretch Internet, right? And this was an opportunity to speak to more schools. And I could talk for 30, 45 minutes and show them all the bells and whistles and how this is going to benefit you and how it's going to help you. And that would be completely overshadowed by just one of our clients in a room at the end taking 30 seconds to say, "Guys, I worked with them. I love them. You can't go wrong with them." I didn't even have to go, right? I mean, those 30 seconds from one of those clients who they know and trust and is a colleague of theirs far outweigh anything I could ever say.
So good.
So to your point, I mean, getting some people that have experienced what you have to offer and then can share that word of mouth. So another great book. I'm sorry, man. I'm giving you a reading list here, but
No,
it's
keep them
called
coming.
it's called Contagious, and it's about the concept of how you get ideas to become viral. How do you get them to spread? And has some great information and research in there about the concept of word of mouth, and it's just so vital for any business, but especially new businesses. Get those first couple people on your team, find out who your raving fans are, and how, once you've identified those people, your promoters, put them to work for you. They usually
Mm,
don't even need any incentive. They'll do it if you've served them well and helped, make their life better, they're almost always more than happy just to go out without any incentive at all and just share the word.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what you just said right there, Ryan, is gold for anybody building something or trying to build something or wanting to build something. So I love that. I think that's great. Well, listen, why don't we point some people to some resources and to the website and to anywhere else that you would direct people to find out more about some of these things. So whether we can point people, so we've got the website 7marches.com.
Yep.
But on a couple of levels, one of the things that I really think is awesome about your website is the blog, and I think that that is just an incredible resource for people in ministry, people with organizations that they're wanting to grow. And I really think that that's an incredible resource that's just available to people for free. But then, so, we could talk about some of the stuff that's just available as far as resources go. But then also let us know for maybe, somebody who is a leader of a church or an organization or something like that that might be interested in going a little bit further with what you guys have to offer.
Yeah, 7marches.com is a place to go. That's a great point, a great starting point, just to learn more about how we, what makes us different, how we structure the process. Gives you a breakdown of each of the marches and specifically what tools we have and what we cover. And yeah, our blog's a great resource. I've been a little bit, hasn't been updated as frequently lately as I've been a little bit more focused on building out Parent Pulse. But that's there's a lot of good stuff on there as well, and that will continue to be updated. And there's a link, of course, to reach out to us and schedule a time to chat if anyone wants to learn more. We're always more than happy to do kind of like you. I think part of your ministry and your mission with this podcast is just to build relationships, just to get to know people and share stories and learn how God's moving. And so I always tell people, it's not a sales call if you schedule a time with me on the website. It's not, sure, I'll tell you how we work at 7 Marches, but more than anything, I'd love to hear your story, love to hear what you're working through, love to hear your challenges. And if there's a connection and we can help, great. If not, I've got one more person in my sphere that I know and that I can hopefully build a relationship with over time. So yeah, reach out if you want to chat and would love to get to know some more people that might need some help.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, that's kind of how we got connected, right? We started off. It was in the, I guess, somewhat earlier stages of the Measure.Church, and
Yep.
you had reached out to me, I think, and then, but yeah, it was just we were just talking. It was just a conversation. You weren't trying to like push
Right.
anything. Like, it was a very comfortable interaction, and and then a friendship developed out of it. And I think that that's super cool. And you're my Lutheran brother, and I love it, and it's awesome, and I really
Everybody's got to have
appreciate
one.
what you're doing. Yeah.
You didn't ask me yet about the tonal. We're going to talk about the
Dude, let's
tonal.
talk about that tonal, because or am I pronounced? How did you pronounce it? Did I say it differently than you?
Tonal.
Okay, no, we said it.
Tonal.
We said it the same way.
Yeah.
For a second I thought I said it differently. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I noticed your tonal on the wall back
Yeah.
there, and I was
Yeah.
asking you about it. Then I was like, no, let's wait, because I want everyone to hear about
Yeah.
this. So tell us about it.
It's well, so we just talked about word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a paid representative for Tonal, but I love their product so much that I know I've at least had 2 other people purchase their product just because of my testimonial. The thing's awesome. So I think I was telling you before we went on, we bought it a week or 2 before COVID. And thankfully we did, because the minute COVID hit, everybody was trying to get their in-home gym equipment, and there was like a 6-month back order on this thing. But I'm a tech guy, as we've talked about today. There's no cooler tech gadget that I've ever owned or used. I'm not a gym rat, but this thing has made me want to work out every day. The way
Awesome.
you can, they've got constantly updated programs of trainers on there. It has up to 200 pounds of resistance, so you can do just about anything you can in a weight room. And all kinds of different moves. And it's got built-in spotter technology. So if you're struggling, it'll automatically help you. It's got mirrors to tell you if your form is off. It's really, really cool. And the neatest thing is we got this pretty early on, before Tonal was as well known as it is now. Now they're putting a lot of money in ad. I mean, I think they're valued at over $1 billion now, but it is bug free. I mean, I've not had a single glitch in this thing.
That's
And
awesome.
so to use that type of technology with that, those types, it's fairly new technology, right? I mean, it's proprietary, and for them to be able to release something that is that bug free is somebody who's been in technology and built software platforms and knowing all the problems you can run into. I've just been really, really impressed with it. So it's not a cheap. I think it's $3,500 to buy, so it's not cheap, but over time, it's it's eliminated our need for gym membership, and I can do it at any time right in my house and get a great workout in. So there's my commercial for the Tonal.
That's awesome, man. Yes, the first time I saw that thing, I was like, "That is cool.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I got to get one of those." How does it how does it feel as far as, because it's a pretty amazing concept that the weight is electronic,
Use uses
so
magnets.
you're
Yeah,
you're
it's all
adjusting it,
magnetic.
yeah. Yeah, so it's a pretty amazing thing. So when you're so whether you're, pulling down, or, whatever it is, that whatever kind of workout that you're doing,
Mhm.
is it how does it feel in comparison to using an actual machine in the gym?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty dang close. I mean, they've got eccentric mode on here too, so it can add extra resistance, as you're bringing the weight back, and it's got some advanced modes on there too. I think it's pretty dang close to what you'd experience in the gym. I haven't noticed any overwhelming differences. Again, I'm not a gym rat. I'm not somebody that spends 2 hours a day. Some of those folks, maybe they have differing opinions on it, but if you're just somebody that wants to get a good solid workout in, whether it's for toning, strength,
Yeah.
weight loss, whatever, it's gonna blow you away. I think it's a really neat system. So
Well,
I
dude, I've
yeah,
seen
it,
some
it feels.
videos of Tyson working out on the tonal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like big shots like that, athletes, and
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah. They've
man.
got a lot of prominent endorsers now too, well-known athletes. But yeah, it's cool. Like I said, I can't recommend it enough. And it's cool too because every family member can have their own profile on it, and it tracks your they call it your strength score. So based on how frequently you work out, and it automatically adjusts the weights for you. So from one workout to a next, it notices how you're doing with the workout. So if it says, oh, with that bench press, we noticed you had no problem. So next time you get on there, you might notice it adjusted at 5 pounds up. So
Mm,
it's got the artificial intelligence on it is pretty neat. So really cool
that's
tech.
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. I know you're a big baseball fan. What about football? Are you looking forward to this Sunday at all? Are you
Yeah, I'll
into
watch.
it?
I'm not a huge, believe it or not, NFL fan. I'm a passionate Major League Baseball fan, which I'm frustrated
Mhm.
about the lockout right now. But
Yeah.
I'll certainly watch the game. I'll probably be rooting for Cincy. It'd be fun to see the Bengals get one, I think. But I don't have really a rooting interest in the game. But it's always fun to watch.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any um love for the Rams or not, just because of, being living out there in the
No,
West
they
Coast and
weren't
stuff.
there. I think they were still in St. Louis
Yeah.
when we lived out there. So no, I don't have any allegiances in the NFL. I mean, I live in Vegas now, but I hate the Raiders. I mean, if I had to pick a team, just from we lived 12 years in Arizona before this, so if I had to pick an NFL team, it'd probably be the Cardinals. But who they had a great year, disappointing finish, but
Yeah.
yeah, that'd probably be my pick. But I'm more of a baseball guy. I'm a New York Mets diehard, unfortunately. So I've had
Unfortunately.
plenty of punishment over the years.
Yeah. Do you have any hopes for this season?
Well, hopefully there is. My hope is there is a
Hopefully there's
season.
a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
So
hope. That's a good place to
but I
start.
do. I mean, they've got the Mets have the richest owner in baseball now, and they've been spending money left and right. And they got Max Scherzer now to team up with Jake DeGrom. They've
Mm-hmm.
got this dynamic
It's
1-2
huge.
punch at the top of the rotation. So I don't know. The Mets usually it's become a verb that people say they Metsed, right? And when you Mets, that means you just tank inexplicably, right? Bad stuff
Mm-hmm.
happens, and
Yeah.
so it's probably just a matter of time until that happens this year. But that's a beautiful thing about baseball, right? Is there's 30 teams going into spring training every year that feel like, hey, this could be our year. But yeah, we'll see. I am a fortunately, here's a funny story, Duke. Is I watch a lot of the Mets games. There's 162 regular season games.
Yeah.
And so sometimes my wife will say, really, you're going to watch another game? I'll say, hey, but I'm not a big NFL fan. I don't watch NFL on Sundays. And she's like, oh, yeah, you're right. She hasn't caught on yet that there's only, 17 NFL games now a year? And there's
17.
162. So
Yeah.
the minute she realizes that, I'm in trouble. But for the time being, I still go back to that well.
Yeah, man. I used to watch I used to watch every Yankee game.
Oh, wow.
Every single day I'd watch it because so like I don't even have cable right now, but when I used to live in New Jersey, we had the Yes Network, and they would always show the replay later that night. So a lot of times, because I was like working in restaurants and stuff back then, and just different things, and so I would a lot of times I'd get home late, and I would be able to catch the encore if I didn't get to see the regular game. But yeah, man, it was so like 6 days a week. I used to watch every game,
That's awesome.
but not anymore.
Yeah. Well,
Can't do that now.
Life happens, and kids and all that. And but I'm with you, man. If I had the time, I could. A lot of people think baseball's boring. I grew up loving it, so I'm fascinated by the strategy and what happens between pitches and all that. I could watch every inning of every Mets game, and even watch other teams play. I love the sport, so it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting. I think that was actually why I got so into I was really into baseball when I was a kid, and then kind of lost interest. And then like as I was getting into my adult years, that was kind of the allure of it for me was there's games all the time. There's games every
Yes.
day. Like I don't have to wait till Sunday to watch
Yes.
a football game. It was just there's always something to go to, you know.
That's
So
right.
I
It's
enjoy
like
that.
comfort food, right? You can just
Yeah.
have it on in the background,
It's
and it
always
just
there.
brings you a sense of peace, So
Yeah. All right, Ryan. Well, I appreciate you, man. Thanks again so much for your time and for coming back on the show. And I do appreciate all the value that you're adding. And I'm with you, man. I've got hopes for Measure.Church to to come back around and stuff like that. But I love what you're doing now, and I really I love your heart toward wanting the people of God and Christ-centered organizations to be at their best and reaching their potential, and having just sort of the maximum momentum to really accomplish the goals that God has given them, the vision that God has given them, and big picture to see the expansion of God's kingdom on earth, and more people coming to know him and getting discipled, and just all these different things that I think the approach that you take to it is awesome. And I say this every time, but I think it's so needed. And so again, I really appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, no, thanks, Duke, and blessings on your upcoming edition, and excited for you to grow your family. So I'll be praying for you guys too. But always a pleasure to connect with you, and enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you for taking the time to check out this episode. I pray that it blessed you, challenged you, encouraged you. If it did, if you would consider subscribing or leaving a review on one of the podcast platforms, or sharing it out with someone that you think could benefit from listening to it as well. All of that would be really, really appreciated. Don't forget to check out 7marches.com and some of those resources that are available from Ryan and his team. And again, appreciate you all. Have an awesome day, and see you next time.